Well, welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. I met today's guest at the Glendale Moose Lodge. It was a long story about how both I and he ended up there. And today he's here to tell that story and how it was incorporated in the fair. And indeed, he's the new King of the Fools. I'm talking, of course, about my good friend, Kevin McGrath. Kevin, how are you doing?
McGrath. McGrath.
So maybe not such a good friend. Kevin Mc.
That,
Well, let me
but
give you the traditional first fair folk at work question, which
mhm.
was, who was the person who said to you, there's this thing called fair, and what did they say to get you out there?
Well, the first time I'd seen the advertisements in the newspaper about the Renaissance Fair, but I really wasn't sure what it was about. But when I was the theater department at East LA College in the early 70s, we were working on a show had been suggested that we should audition with to perform at the Renaissance Fair. So I was cast as Moliere's The Miser. A group of us in the cast got together to go out and check out what this Renaissance Fair thing was, because although I'd seen many over the years advertisements for it, I'd never attended. So it was a weekend. So we got my friend Alice Hayward, her two daughters, and five of us from the cast into her, I think it was like a Toyota station wagon. And we rode out there to Agora and parked in one of the fields where they had all the parking lots. And I went there to experience my first Renaissance fair,
What was your
the
first
original.
sort of physical impression of the fair?
I just loved the fact that it was hidden away. I remember there were kites in the sky outside the parking lot. Somebody was doing this sort of festive flying of box kites or Chinese kites or something. But we got in, and I'd already studied a bit about Shakespeare. I'd gone to some Shakespeare film festivals, places like the, what was it, the Vista, the New Art, Pasadena, Santa Monica, other. They would show a different film each week. It would be Hamlet or Othello or Henry V, Richard III, all these different things taken from different eras, but they were films that were available to put together a film festival. So I'd watched all these and gotten inspired. And when I went out to fair, I felt like, Shakespeare, the period was alive and colorful and full of aromas of food and cinnamon buns and roasted nuts and turkey legs, all that, that kind of experience. But I remember, I don't even know what year it was, but I saw Mark Lewis. He did Spark in the Dark, and he did his wonderful, fabulous tales that he told that were word pictures, and he had routines that he did. But I remember going there. It wasn't until much later, obviously, when I became a participant. But he was standing up at the top of the high road, dressed as a pirate, sleeveless vest, a bandana around his head, and full beard. And he was holding this chest, and he said, "Oh, there's no treasure in this. Oh, no, 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 nothing in here." And he ran off. And I just thought, my God, this is amazing. People are performing right next to you. And it was a full on 360 engagement of theater and crafts and music and dance and just all the things that captured my imagination that I loved about fair. So many different characters, both as historical characters and as I came to learn later, the people themselves were quite characters.
Let me back you up a bit. Back when you were watching Shakespeare movies, can you remember a time in your life when you said to yourself, I really like Shakespeare? And what kind of kid were you to then go, I want to be a Shakespearean actor? And
Well, the truth of it is, I was from a family of 10 children, working father back in the 50s, early 60s. And my mother was the housewife, and we had 10 children in the household. My father, he worked for the phone company at the time, and he worked very hard, and my mom worked very hard. And it wasn't until much later when I realized how hard it was to wrangle 10 kids. Could be hectic at times, and there were often disagreements, shall we say, between the siblings. And I was going through high school, not a happy camper. It was the 60s, and I was enamored of the cultural changes. And my mother, particularly, was very conservative Catholic. And the idea of growing my hair and having an interest in cultural events of the time made it hard. So I was not a good student, which is what I'm hemming and hawing about. And I was failing English. And I had this one teacher, Mr. Blacklock, who recognized that I was not stupid. I was just, or lazy, although do cop to that at times. But I was troubled, and I didn't realize that I was being rebellious, and I didn't do my homework. And for every five homeworks you don't do, your grade lowers. Well, I was getting an F by the third week of my English class, and my teacher, who knew that I had written poetry in the class and done other things that suggested I might be redeemable, he offered to take me to see a showing of Shakespeare's Othello, starring Laurence Olivier, what was it, Judi Dench, and Maggie Smith, a young, very young Maggie Smith. And I saw that, and I was just captivated by the language, the clothing, the intensity, the intrigue, the sex, the violence, all those elements that are in Shakespeare's plays in one form or another. And the language just seemed so intriguing to me that after that experience of going to see the film with the honors class to raise my grade to a C, I think, the next assignment was to read Macbeth. And I read the play, and I got the highest A of all three of his English classes that he taught that semester. So it was a cue to me that this might be an area for me to explore. Subsequently, that was why I went to the Shakespeare Film Festival to find out more. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's like Keith Richards talking about why he likes music. He says, I can't explain it. I just know that I like it. That
real quick, where
was it.
did you go to high school?
I went to San Gabriel High School.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
It was a kind of sequence of events that kind of turned my life around. And
So you've
Shakespeare
ever
has
been on the Shakespeare's acting track ever since?
not so much. It was something I aspired to. I only did one Shakespeare play at East LA College. I went back later after I had finished my time there, and worked with some friends of mine. And I was in a version of Othello playing Rodrigo. Back at that time, they were not doing a whole lot of Shakespeare at the theater. They were mostly doing Neil Simon stuff, Kaufman and Hart, things that were not high cost properties, small junior college budget could handle.
Did your production of Moliere's The Miser get picked up by Fair?
No, the group, as happens with many theaters and bands and things like that, we had some falling out. I don't remember if it was ego or time or commitment or whatever, but that didn't happen. We never did audition for it. But I continue to go out to fair because I loved the environment. I loved the spectacle, the parades, the horns, the drums, the poxy boggards, the people dancing in the streets or begging for money, or the guy that he had like a one note drum with a stick through it. He was just a character. There was no explanation. He just played this thing, sang his little song about the pigs or something. And it was just unique. It was not like this is a presentation. You were just surrounded by experiences that you took away. And everybody, and every time you went, it was a different experience.
How did you get
Um,
from patron or customer to actual on the acting side of it?
well, I had gone for years, and my ex wife and I went for many years, but she didn't want to participate. So when we came to a parting of the ways, my good friend Bob Gibson, who was dancing with the Merry Pranksters, that was overseen by Patty Blanco at the time, he said, well, yet another attempt at getting a show accepted fell through before we even auditioned. So he said, well, look, I've got a gig with the Merry Pranksters. Do you want to come out and dance with us? And I was intimidated because although I enjoyed dancing, but when I came up in the 60s, it was not ballroom dancing. Never learned officially dance steps. I just kind of faked it like everybody else did. I mean, I knew the twist, I knew the mashed potato, but I didn't know how to dance. So,
I,
so I went out there as a volunteer, and for the first year, I danced at the Maypole and on stage when they allowed me to. The second year I was there was, I think it was the 35th anniversary of the fair. So we carried these poles, these with garlands on them, and walked around. And part of our gig was to establish the walkway with these adornments celebrating the anniversary with garlands and emblems and things. So I just did whatever I could while I was in that group the first couple of years. And
I'm sorry, as
eventually,
you made that transition from guest to participant to performer, what struck you as the big difference?
well, I wasn't as drunk because there was no need to be sober. And the establishments encouraged the consumption of beverages because, as I later learned, it was a good income for the fair. But let's see, how did I make the transition? I guess because I'd been a performer before, it wasn't hard for me to start acting again. And I started with the dance group. Actually, they had a script that was put together around a dancing experience. So we had lines, we had characters, and then there would be a break. It was like a musical. There would be a break, and then we would dance a certain dance, and then we'd go back to doing the dialogue. So
What
it
was your
reminded me.
character?
I was just one of the dancers. I was new, so I wasn't a featured player, but I certainly did as much as I could to add to the scene and the drama and the
General
hope for,
brouhaha.
yeah, the hope for hilarity of the experience. So that reminded me again about how much I enjoyed theater, but I didn't really do a whole lot. I tried to do a little bit of street work. I was not confident as an interactive performer in the same way that I was as a stage performer. I didn't have that fourth wall protecting me. And when my language skills would dry up, then I'd kind of wander off quickly. But everybody has to learn somewhere. If you fail in the act of performing as best you can, and then you go, I won't do that one again. or
Well, that is one thing I found especially appealing about fair is that if you screwed up, there was going to be another person like 2 minutes behind. It was just being thrown in the water and people just
yeah,
walked by and you entertained them and you kind of
yeah,
figured out what your stick was.
yeah.
through
Let me
time?
try that again and better. Yeah. And I also have to remember the many teachers I had because in the early years, I dutifully went to all my classes because I wanted to learn. I took singing from Linda Underhill. Yes, she had a commanding voice and presence. And later, I took singing classes from Kate Fredericks. I took acting from Uncle Dave Springhorn, who, when he asked me to say a line, he said, "Mr. Olivier, tone it down a little," or something to that effect. He was letting me know that he could see my inspiration and was not bad, but no cigar yet. And Mark's Celine,
Yes, he's my good
Marcel,
friend.
and he and his wife, who later I loved their singing and performing group, but he was another acting teacher. So I was absorbing people that could help me get my skills together. And when you talk about the acting in Shakespeare, as a patron before I became a performer, I was very taken with the Reduced Shakespeare Company. I would watch them every chance I got. They were brilliant and funny and exactly the type of thing that I wanted to do, not necessarily a parody of Shakespeare, but they had all the elements and wonderful stage presence and great gags and silliness and personas. And I love that they were three people doing, as I saw later, the complete works of Shakespeare, which has since been published and well known around the globe because I've seen notice of it. I studied at Shakespeare and Company years later, a theater training group in Massachusetts, and up on the wall was the cast of their production, the complete works of Shakespeare by the Reduced Shakespeare Company. And I said, I know the guys that wrote that. I got to meet them and work with, not work, they were fellow performers of mine at the time, and I revere them to this day.
One
So
thing,
I
I'm going to back you up a little bit if I could.
sure,
I've been told by dancers of that era that Patty had sort of a definite philosophy of performing dance, which is you be loud and big and look like you're having a great time
yeah.
and being 100% accurate to the period was kind of lower on the list. Your primary objective was to entertain the crowd that you had in front of you rather than be strictly historically
Well,
accurate.
I know that the sources were historical, and she had trained with part of, I believe, Newcastle.
Miss Doug
They were,
Berger and those guys.
yeah, that was before my time, but I know there was a history of passing that down. But I know that there was Playford and a historical record of the dances and the movements. To speak specifically to my experience learning from Patty, she wanted us to be precise as far as our movements and, uniform. So it wasn't a mess, but we also knew that we had a contemporary audience that many people were looking at like, what the heck is this? And what we wanted to do was invite the audience to have as much fun as we were having. And so there was a boisterousness and a deliberate show of abandon, I guess you would call it, and fun in idea of people that worked in the field or did common workman stuff during the day or the regular season, having a holiday and cutting loose at a celebration of the yearly fair. So I would characterize it as theatrical, inviting, and fun, and done for the audience that we had, not as a museum piece trying to for a documentary film showing the style of the dancing without any personality because
How
we
long?
wanted people to hoot and holler.
Right.
We wanted them to have a good time. I mean, they have another beer. Come on, let's go. Let's dance. And that's what it was about. It was about fun and letting loose and taking people away from their regular experience.
How long were you in Pranksters?
It seems longer than that, but I believe it was about 7 years.
Hmm.
Because I got so caught up that I participated the Southern Fair, then Northern Fair, and then other little fairs that sprung up, and many of them were a one-time, one-off thing. I remember we were in North Hollywood. We danced at a opening of a flower shop. It was the Sherwood Forest florist. Yeah, I think it was about 7 years that I participated with the group in an official capacity.
And then what happened?
Then there was some changes in the group, and Patty had her own life issues that she was dealing with. And some of us, she wasn't going to do fair that year. So some of us who still wanted to created a group called Plantagenet Players or something along those lines. And we did one season without her. It was a tough time because people were feeling left out. And, there was a feeling of, well, we have to keep it tight because we don't want to have to charge too much. It was
Can
it
I
was
ask
one
you
of
a
those
different
things.
question?
Yeah, of course.
Think back on all the dances you have ever done. If you were to do a dance set of only of your five favorite songs that gave you the most joy to do, what would be those five songs?
Well, I haven't thought of it for a while, so I'm not sure I'll come up with five, but Stingo was a very lively, fun, and kind of wild dance that I remember doing that I had a lot of fun with, and that we would kind of test ourselves with as far as making it back to the next move on time based on how far apart we were. So Stingo definitely. I remember Goddesses. It was a marathon dance, but it was a dance that included many people. So it was popular because it wasn't just, okay, three couples get to do this one. It was two lines, the men in one side, the women in the other. And it was just fun. I liked the music. I liked the movement. So I liked that one. I liked Heart's Ease because it was very not dainty, but it was as courtly as the country dancers ever got. It was a very serious thing, and it was fun to do that as an alternate to all the sort of wildness of the dances that we did. It's hard to think of the names. It's been quite a while since I've done them. I'm sure somebody will listen to this and say, well, what about this? And what about that? And I can see the movements, but I cannot name the dances for you.
Well, let me give
Uh,
you another question, and hopefully,
yeah.
in answering this one, some other dances will come to mind.
Okay.
Do you remember any of the musicians that you played with as being good?
I do, I was thinking about this today. Can't remember the name of the fiddler for Newcastle, but I know our main musician was Morgan McDowell, but we all knew her as Morgan, and she was just brilliant and sweet and fun. When I say sweet, I mean nice. She was a formidable force. That's what I mean. I'm not trying to diminish her, um, the strength of her personality, but she was a very lovely woman. It still is. And yeah, Morgan McDowell was our centerpiece, and she had so many connections with the other musicians that they would run from their other gig to play for us. And for the life of me, I can't remember. all the names. There was a guy from the Celt camp came down. There was a violinist with long black hair, wonderful
Davis
player. What's that?
was,
Davis. Yeah.
yeah,
There was a sackbut player, David, I think was his name. And there was another guy that played a Crummel horn, some wonderful people. And I used to hang with them, and I regret that my memory is terrible. But we always had great people because they loved playing with Morgan. And she had the equivalent of a Renaissance orchestra at times. People would be playing the bodhran. We had our friends who were in the group, Mardine, they were married at some point, Mardine and Randy Gordon, the Gordons. He had a bone business and they would be playing the bones along with the band when they weren't dancing. So a lot of wonderful musicians, but can't recall all their names, but I applaud over the years their support for the group and the enjoyment we had in
well,
hearing
it
them
just
play.
adds to the whole atmosphere of the environment of a Renaissance village. If you turn around, there's somebody playing an instrument.
Yeah, and there was a couple of guys from Newcastle that came down. Dave Rickert was part of it at times, and Jason Adagio. Because of the outreach and the connection with the musicians, whenever there was a gig and they wanted to play and they knew they could play with their friends, they were in. They all knew the repertoire because of their other gigs that they were doing, many of the same songs. And because they were great musicians, they could fit in. Kate Fredericks, of course. Kate would come around, she would play with us. Everybody had two or three other gigs, but they would come and join us, especially on main stage. It was a good way to show off their talents and be part of the stage show.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit.
Sure.
Did you ever get comfortable being an individual on the street?
I think I did at times, yeah. It wasn't a major part of my day because at the time we were doing 5 sets a day. They were about a half hour. So I was usually hydrating and drying off and resting most of the time. So I didn't spend a lot of time in the street. Although over the years, I've made a concerted effort to talk to people. And even now, when I went out there for the coronation, I invited a few people that were dressed in foolish garb that would fit in with the fair and just practiced my BFA and invited people to join the parade.
What was your street persona that you used to engage people with at fair?
Well, the original one was Alden Forrester. I was a trade was being a forester, being out taking care of the Lord's forest that he owned. But I was, gamekeeper, that kind of thing. My colors were I had a kind of a tan leather vest that I later learning more about the weather as time went on. I decided to do the Italian slicing so that the leather would breathe a little bit and would not be so hot, especially when dancing. My colors initially were brown and green and maybe red or blue stockings, I think. Or actually, I the first pair I ever bought were soccer athletic socks, and I soaked them in tea to get a tan color, very, very earth colors for my first costume, and a leather hat that I cut the brim off and made into a beret, and I sliced slits in that to breathe. So, I learned along the way.
Have
I,
you
I,
ever used Fair One experience in a performing venue outside of Fair? Like when you're on
I'm not.
stage on doing a Shakespeare play in a quote unquote real theater, do
Mhm.
you ever find yourself cluing into doing something similar to this, only out
Oh
at the
yeah,
fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's you're learning, especially in acting and performing and dancing, is a cumulative thing. So I've ad-libbed bits where I did maybe a dance step when I was auditioning as Falstaff, when I was performing in a play. I mean, you add in what you think can fill the moment. So I've certainly used dance moves as a character bit at times. I certainly use the hawking type, ladies and gentlemen, kind of voice for a character. You build on whatever your experience is. And I've certainly drawn on both what I've watched other people do. A performer is a relentless thief of the best of what they've seen. And I've sold from both live interactors and people on film. So it all goes into the pot and comes out in my own expression, both physically and through my own personality. But yeah, I'd say the answer to that is constantly, and both consciously and unconsciously.
Well, let me ask you to name some of the people you've stolen from, either in the Fools Guild or at the fair.
I stole from the Wizard Show, the slow motion bits. I don't know exactly where I would have used them, but I was so enamored that those guys and Hugh and William Barrett and Sandy Grin were in the Wizard Show, and I send a nod to the passing of Sandy. I know it affected a great deal of people. I wasn't as close to him as they were, of course, but I always enjoyed his company and was amazed by his both his performing and musical skills. I've tried to be a good friend to William and felt like I wasn't a close friend to Q, but I always enjoyed his company and his presence. I learned from Jack Tate on main stage. The Green Man who used to hang in the trees was also a major performer.
Billy
Uh,
Scudder.
Billy Scudder, of course. Yeah. I mean, I feel foolish not being able to recall the names, but I can see the faces and performances. They were gods to me when I watched them on main stage do the Boomba Boomba show and the Italian Commedia. Yeah, I mean, I love those guys. So, I mean, I watched them all. They were like the all stars for me. I performed with some of them at various times in other smaller venues. The Morgans, I love watching them. Our King, Bonnie, she's always entertaining. Saw one of the Morgans, I can't remember if it was Bonnie or her sister, but they performed when I saw Paul McCartney several years ago at the Forum. They opened the show with circus performers, and she came in. I think she was rolling the ball, balancing herself. And later they did the bit where they took her out of the box. These are all stars to me. I have not forgotten the skills that they've enshrined in my memory and subconscious over the years. I wouldn't have learned what I have if it wasn't for the example and the contribution of being able to see them over the years.
Over the years, what have you learned as, say, the important lessons if you're going to be on stage at the fair? What are the 5 rules of a successful performance out at fair?
I don't know that I have narrowed it down to 5 rules, but I always try to be conscious of the environment is, both the limitations of sight and sound, because there are so many competing things. I try to project a personality or reaction as whatever character I happen to be, whether because I spent many years with James Britton Hendricks in the Britton Ensemble of 13 years. I started working with him in 2003, and we've performed at both the Dickens Fair and Renaissance fairs. And so if I'm a singing character, I try to characterize the song. So anyway, your question was, what are the things you want to be You want to be seen, you want to be heard if you can. You want to use body language that's appropriate. Do not saw your hand. You try to make it work. You try to engage the audience without being pulled out, focusing on anybody. I don't know if I even made five, but try to have the energy focus. And
Always look like you're having fun.
yeah, well, I mean, that's what it's about. People come there to have a good time. And if you're like, oh, I don't want to sing this song again, or that dance, I always get put in that dance. You've got to project enthusiasm, joy, and fun, because that's what they've come to see. Didn't come to see you and your personal problems, if you have any at the time.
I'm sorry, did you ever meet the Pattersons or get a sense from
Yeah,
them
yeah,
what their
yeah.
dream
I
was for the fair?
I didn't quite get all of your question. I did meet Pattersons. Always enjoyed, being able to pay homage to their providing the playground for us, and the gift of their creation. And I wasn't close friends with them, but always recognized them when I saw them. And when I had a conversation, it was cordial and appreciative and in keeping with the spirit of the show.
Did you ever get a chance to talk with the Pattersons as to what they thought the spirit of the fair was?
I don't recall anything that specific, but I knew about the history of how it developed and their background, both as teacher and ad executive. So I knew they had their professional interests and abilities, and also that it was created as an educational foundation. So I took advantage of that. I admired that. I figured these people built something that has gone, I don't know about worldwide, but certainly spread out across the US. And I know that it definitely inspired a lot of creative reenactments and history and the craftspeople. So, I mean, I had a healthy appreciation for what two or more people, I mean, I know they weren't alone. Their first incarnation of their wagon, and I could see her face, and she's a very outspoken,
Judy
and
Corey?
Judy Corey, very outspoken and performer to this day, for her capacity to engage an audience. I mean, they were lucky that the people that they started with had those talents and abilities. So I honored them.
I'm going to ask a sort of weird question. And if the
Okay.
answer is no, that's okay.
Okay.
Have you ever been in a show that bombed? I mean, just was really bad.
Hmm.
And if you have, what did you learn from being in a bad show that you might not necessarily have learned in just being in successful shows?
Well, I mean, everybody's been in a show that doesn't get a big audience. I've been in shows like that where at times there are more people on the stage than there are in the audience.
I'm familiar
Um,
with that phenomenon, yes.
yeah, and the way I look at it is, in the early days, a lot of it for me was about massaging my ego, because I was an insecure person at various times in my life, especially in my early days. And this was a way for me to be larger than life and get some appreciation. I think what I've learned is, don't do it for your own ego, do it for the love of the art. And that's what I've, in my best accomplishments, tried to do. Certainly, everyone loves the applause and the appreciation and the laughs. That's part of the coin of the realm if you're a performer.
Mhm.
But I always try to learn when I can. And I find that every role gives me something new to explore. I don't want to keep repeating the same shtick. So you always want to branch out and learn. So I guess that's what I've done from any show, whether it's successful or or unsuccessful is learn something and grow beyond what I thought I could do.
What are you hoping to grow and get out of sort of being king of the fools?
Well, I want to both do my best with the help of the people who've come before me to provide fun events that are not egocentric to my interests, although, my interests inform the type of things that I want to do. But I want to provide opportunities for people to have fun with their friends and meet new people along the way, which is what I did. I went to my first Fool's Guild party when William Barrett was king at a airplane hangar out in Santa Monica, I believe. And I didn't really know. I had a couple of friends from my dance group, the Merry Pranksters, that were going. And I, thought, well, I'll go, I'll see what this is about. And William was there greeting people as they went in. Now, that's not really my nature. I'm a much more, I won't say shy, but that's certainly part of it, introverted a bit. So I don't know where I fall on the spectrum between introversion and extroversion, but I find that I need to recharge in a solitary environment. So I think what I'm going to try to do is be more interactive personally with the people that show up at the parties, to let them know I appreciate them coming and that I'm grateful for their participation, and be more of a representative of the Fools Guild personally during my time. And so it's like to provide interesting and fun events and be more personally involved, because I tend to hang out on the fringes and let the people with the stronger expressive personalities kind of set the tone, but try to do my part.
Well, when I hear you talking, it reminds me of how you struck me when we were all at the Moose Lodge, because you
Mm,
struck me very much as a facilitator and one who was interested in getting things done
mm.
and wanting to listen to people and hearing what they needed to do, and then seeing what resources you had available to make them happen. Would you say that's fair?
I would say that's accurate. Yeah. It was, like I say, it was a bit of a task in that particular situation, because unlike the Fools Guild, I didn't have, I mean, for certain events, when they were involved, it was wonderful. But the lack of support in other areas in that particular situation made it difficult. But I would say your assessment of my approach is pretty close. Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I don't necessarily want to be the focal point, but I certainly want to do my part and have fun and facilitate a good experience for other people.
But the other thing, not to go on about how much I admired your work at the Moose Lodge and just at the fair in general, but it also seemed like you were not overly concerned with getting credit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank you for that.
I get my satisfaction out of my own particular performances and my own things that I do, but it's not like, okay, let's hear it for me for doing this. I'm not particularly comfortable with that kind of role. I like to have fun with that. And I certainly did at the coronation, because it was inevitable. Everybody was focused on me. So I figured you play with it, you have fun with it. But I didn't go around in the crowd going, by the way, I did that. I did that. you know?
Okay, I'm kind of running out of things to say. So I think I'm going to give you my last question,
Okay. Very good.
which is congratulations. You have just been awarded the highly coveted Phyllis Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fair Skills Applied in Life. The band has been told to sit on its hands, and you have as much time as you like. Give me your acceptance speech.
Well, I first off would like to thank Patterson's, all the family, the ones who are currently carrying on the Patterson history with the Dickens Fair. And I've been privileged to spend some time in the secret lounge, which I appreciate very much. I have learned so much, and it's been just a joy. I mean, it changed my whole life, turned it around, gave me a whole group of friends that I treasure and continue to celebrate and enjoy the company of and create that particular magic. Not as much or as often as I had, but this year gives me the opportunity to reconnect with much of that history and encourage more fair participants who may have not been around when I was actively in the Shire to connect with the Fools Guild, which is my kind of lifeline to the fair now. Sadly, the Britain Ensemble is inactive at the moment. If we're ever lucky enough to get, and this is a call for tenors and sopranos. If you want to be in a wonderful singing group, please contact James Britton Hendricks to see about reviving the group that we were in for many years. I'll just conclude by saying it's an honor to get an award named after the Pattersons. I still revere them for all the work and history that they put into the living history that allowed me to have a venue to grow, thrive, and learn, and still be pursuing in my own way. And I'm glad to be part of a long line of people that were gifted with that brigadoon that we return to yearly when the festivals, whether it's the original Renaissance Pleasure Fair or the Dickens Fair, happen. I'm happy to lend my abilities and wonder and joy to that experience. Thank you.
Well, that's my May 2024 interview with Kevin McGrath. If you'd like me to pass along any notes or comments to Kevin, you can email me them at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments to me can also be emailed to me at djng@earthlink.net. And if you or anyone you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, you can email me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye bye.